Mr. Gakharia, let's start with the protests against foreign agent law. Did you expect such a backlash from Georgians, and do you think that it will stop here?
Yes, I expected it. Because this is an existential question for Georgia. We all know that more than 80% of Georgians votes for countries' European and Euro-Atlantic future. And that's why when someone is putting under question countries' foreign orientation, of course, people of Georgia will react. And that's why we saw the thousands of people on Rustaveli Street protesting against foreign agents law. And it was very much understandable for me, you know, that I also attended this protests, and it was honor for me to be with young generation and students of this country.
Some commentators saw the start of a Georgian Maidan in the protests. Do they have a chance to evolve similarly, or will the Georgian opposition find a different path?
No, there is no any chance, because we all see that there is no political leaders leading these protests. This is young generation, students, and as soon as they achieve the main goal, and you know the reaction of ruling party, GD, withdrawal of this bill, that's why I do not see any chance to transform these protests into something like Maidan.
During the rallies, we heard people saying that the Georgian government is serving Russian interests. Your former boss, Bidzina Ivanishvili, is a former prime minister, first of all, and the businessman who made his fortune in Russia in the 90s. He's widely believed to be a former informal leader of Georgia. So what the role does Russia play in Georgian politics today?
We all know that Russia is occupying this country. Russia occupied 20% of soil of Georgia. And when we see the reaction of Russia on withdrawal of this bill, of course, this is one additional sign that the government Georgia was acting in interest of Russia, and unfortunately, it's very difficult to believe, but unfortunately, looks like that this shift in foreign policy of this country, starting from Ukrainian war, looks like that this is the existential threat for the country. Why? Because when we see how Russia's influence is increasing in the country, starting from economy, ending with some kind of very dangerous security issues. I think the question, what is the motivation, is a different story. But unfortunately, Georgian current government is acting in interest of Russia. And one sign of this is, of course, the adopting and the idea regarding the foreign agents law, which is very simply it's Russia's law. And that's why I think when it comes to current political leaders, this is very much Russian style propaganda they are trying for this very moment to implement, to change the balance of ordinary Georgians supporting West, or something they are calling Georgians' own way, what is very much difficult in this region. So we all realize that when you are occupied by Russia, when you are in this very difficult and complicated region, you have very clear and simple choice. You are with democratic West and Europe, or you are with Russia. Unfortunately, it looks like that the Georgian government trying to maintain power, they very much naturally are moving toward Russia, because the structure of current Georgian power simply do not fit with European values, with European democracy.
But do you think that Bidzina Ivanishvili is responsible for that shift?
Honestly, Bidzina Ivanishvili for this very moment is most influential politician in this country. 2 years ago, when he openly stated that he's leaving politics, publicly communicating this with international partners, with society, with team, finally. But the fact we all faced was that leaving politics looks like he was aiming to stay in politics and to maintain power through implementing further consolidation, illegal consolidation of power. For today, for me, Bidzina Ivanishvili is the most powerful ruler of this country who is trying from the shadow without any responsibility, without any formal responsibility, rule the country through his puppets. And of course, when it comes to this law, foreign agents law, as well as shifting in foreign policy, it's simply impossible to implement without Ivanishvili's instruction.
Do you think that Mr. Ivanishvili has strong ties with the Kremlin?
There is no big difference. For me, the clear is the fact is that he is acting in Kremlin's interest for this very moment. He is moving country toward Russia. And for me, what is the reason, what is his motivation is not the big deal. For me, the critical question is that the country, if Georgia will not be the part of big deal, when this terrible war in Ukraine will be finished. Of course, it means that the Georgia will stay in South Caucasus context, and no one knows when for my country the window opportunity of membership will be open. We are talking about Georgia. The country always was the leader in associated trio, and when it comes to Ukrainian war, the critical and existential mistake of Georgian government was when they bet on Ukraine's loss in this war. And this was critical, and this was huge and strategic mistake of current government. And of course Ivanishvili, because such kind of decisions, it's simply impossible without Ivanishvili's instruction. Unfortunately, this is a fact.
All right, let's talk about Ukraine. The Georgian government condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but however, it decided not to join the international sanctions. Why does the government stay pretty much silent about Ukraine?
When it comes to international platforms, Georgian government is standing with international society, but at the same time, they are making very dangerous statements such as Ukraine couldn't avoid the war. What does it mean when everyone knows that Russia is invasion? And that's why I think when Georgian government, under different reasons, directly targets the Ukrainian government, it's totally unacceptable. It's only undermines the strategic partnership between Georgia and Ukraine. Very close cooperation between Georgia and Ukraine. This is a very important part of this process receiving the candidate status. That's why when I'm saying that it was a huge mistake when a government made the bet on Ukrainian laws and this war, of course, the damage will be received by our country. So when government is not entering the international sanctions, in some cases maybe it's more or less understandable, because Georgia always had the balanced international policy. You know that we are occupied country, but when you are targeting Ukraine, it means that you are narrowing this space for balancing, and it's unacceptable, and it's simply impossible to understand.
When you served as the Minister of Internal Affairs, your party invited a Russian MP to speak in the parliament, knowing about anti-Kremlin mood in Georgian society. That visit triggered mass protests, and the police reacted in a much more violent way than they did last week. Some protesters even lost their sight. So how is your behavior then different from the current Georgian authorities, which you are now criticizing?
There is huge difference between two protests. For today, it was peaceful protest. When we are talking about 20th of June, 2019, it was the protesters simply were attacking the parliament building, trying to enter the parliament building, and it was simply violation. They were attacking police, and by the way, police were standing very bravely more than 3-4 hours. But it's simply uncomparable. When we are talking about these protests and 20th of June, it's completely different story. And that's why even investigation took place after 20th of June, fixed the police. There was some kind of specific cases and it were investigated, but in general, use of power from police was legitimate, and there was no any question about this. But what is most important? Important is when we are comparing two protests, current and 20th of June, it's completely different. It's completely different. And this is the ground for me to criticize behavior of police and the Minister of Internal Affairs for current how they were acting this situation.
On the one hand, the government, Georgian government, declares its aspiration to become a EU member. But on the other hand, it proposes the law that would make very unlikely Georgia's EU candidacy. What's the logic behind this?
The logic is very simple. When you know that the more than 80% of your population supports Euro-Atlantic future of your country, but at the same time, to maintain power, you need somehow to avoid this because it simply do not fit with your structure of power. Somehow you need to blow up this process and prepare ground to blame someone else. This is what government was doing. And when finally, 2 months ago, they realized that because of geopolitical reasons, most likely Georgia will receive candidate status, they started this process of adopting this law. So I'm sure that the current government, unfortunately, not interested to receive this candidate status, but at the same time, they are interested to blame someone else not receiving this candidate status. Yes, this withdrawal of this bill, this is a huge and very important achievement of this protest, but it's not the final step. A lot of we have to do until the December of this year, when final decision was made by EU. And candidate status, this is only one way. How can we protect countries' Euro-Atlantic future? For today, Georgia, as a state, we all Georgians have two critical goals. How to protect countries' Euro-Atlantic future, this is the first, and it's possible through receiving candidate status. And second, how to manage free and fair elections for 2024. And it's possible only through implementing very strong and long international observation mission.
Yes, but what are the concrete solutions that the opposition is proposing now in order for Georgia to get EU candidacy? What are the steps that...
I cannot talk about whole opposition, but our political party, we have very concrete 3 steps plan. The problem of this country is that the European people and it's very difficult for me to say, but pro-Russia government, and this mismatch creates huge turbulence. We all saw thousands of protesters on the street, and it's solvable not only through protests, peaceful protests. It needs candidate status, and it's solvable if we together we bring this message to European capitals that Georgia needs candidate status to protect countries' Euro-Atlantic future and to protect countries' democratic development. Protecting countries' Euro-Atlantic future through receiving candidate status, protecting free and fair elections through strong international observation mission, and protecting countries' democratic future through first ever coalition in this country.
You just mentioned the backsliding from Georgia's backsliding from democracy. You were the member of Georgian Dream government for a couple of years. Do you feel responsible for that?
Yes. As I mentioned several times that the feeling of responsibility, this is only one why I'm standing here. I'm launching a new political party, and this is my duty. I have to return to my people. And when maybe I was most effective person in Bidzina's hand to consolidate this illegal power, but for me, it was very difficult to believe when person who could play very positive role in history of the country with huge power, huge influence. Finally, he will state that he's leaving politics, but he will aim to keep power, and unfortunately, he is ready to pay any price, even price of countries' foreign orientation, to maintain this power. And this is a critical. This was my mistake. This is my duty. I have to return to my people, and I can grant you that I will do this.
And the very last question: are you concerned with the health of former President Mikhail Sakashvili that is now in detention? Does this bother you at all?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course, because for today, the Sakashvili's case is purely humanitarian. And there is no question, is he guilty or not? This is an obligation of government to grant Sakashvili's health, and they have to take any steps needed to grant this health. And of course, it's very much understandable when our international partners and heads of states are put in a situation to start negotiations with Georgia in this very difficult time from Sakashvili's case. Unfortunately, this is how Georgia's internal policy is maintaining. And yes, I think that this is the obligation of government, and there is no question about is Sakashvili guilty or not. This is purely the humanitarian question.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gakharia.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.